Welcome on in to another edition of the Between the Hash Marks podcast. As always, I'm Matt Lombardo, but this week, unfortunately, Mike Tanier is a little bit under the weather, so we're sending Mike all the best, wishing him back on his feet soon. But the show must go on. And if you followed my career at all and listened back to my days at 97.5 The Fanatic in Philadelphia, the ESPN radio affiliate in that market, you might have remembered a good friend, a good pal, my former partner, Joe Stazak. Joe Stazak stepping into the big chair on the Between the Hash Marks podcast. This week, it's a reunion of sorts. Joe, how you doing, my friend?
I'm honored, my friend, to be here. This was like Christmas coming 23 days early, 22 days early when you said I was getting the nod from Mike, and certainly I wish Mike the best as well. I love listening to you guys. I listen to your podcast all the time, but man, nothing like being reunited with my boy at 97.5. And I mean, we still do stuff together and talk all the time and edit each other's stuff. And but this is going to be fun, man. It's going to be epic. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely epic indeed, and certainly an epic Monday night game the other night. And, you know, just a back and forth battle between the Denver Broncos, the Cleveland Browns. We were talking a little bit before we came on the air, just the complete Jameis Winston roller coaster ride that we've come to know and love. 6 total touchdowns, including 2 pick sixes, the game clinching pick 6 by the Denver Broncos. That defense comes up clutch in a huge moment. What was your takeaway for the Broncos coming out of that game, Joe? Because you look at the AFC playoff picture, they're currently the number 7 seed if the postseason started today. And I think that defense travels, it punches above its weight, it's as dominant as you're going to find, and they found a franchise quarterback.
They did find a franchise quarterback in Bo Nix. Last year, he had the highest completion percentage in the country at Oregon. He's played at 2 major programs before, went from Auburn, did well there, went to Oregon. I thought it was interesting. He said he thought the pressure was a little too much at Auburn. Well, Oregon, I mean, they liked their football last time I checked there. In Denver, certainly they have high expectations when you're following in the footsteps of, you know, greats like John Elway and whatnot. But I think him and Sean Payton, they've really kind of found their lockstep together, and I think Bo Nix has really come on. And one of the rookies this year, we talk about some of the rookies that have really shown. You could tell kind of right away in the first year if a guy's going to make it. Bo Nix, he checks that box. You know, I think obviously Jaden Daniels checks that box. Caleb Williams, despite some setbacks, checks that box. But I think Bo Nix in that offense, he's just comfortable. He's calm. I like Sean Payton as a offensive coach, did a lot of stuff with Drew Brees. Wild game last night. It was the complete Jameis Winston experience, because there's a reason why he's not a starting quarterback. And then you can see there's a reason why he won a Heisman, and there's a reason why he's exciting, and there's a reason why he has pretty high upside. But then he kind of goes back into Jameis Winston mode. You know, he had 4 offensive touchdowns, 2 defensive touchdowns, threw for 497 yards. Did anyone remember to cover Jerry Jeudy, former Bronco, who had 235 yards? He was wide open. Looked like a Spurrier offense where someone was wide open all the time. He was wide open. It was a wild game. If you had Cleveland plus the points, you're pulling your hair out, because the interception, the guy's laying there, and you mentioned the receiver just tap him on the shoulder.
Yeah. And all Elijah Moore had to do was tap him on the head, tap him on the shoulder.
Tap him on the head. He just kind of stood there. He gets up and runs for a pick 6, and then they go all the way down the field again like that, and he throws another interception in the end zone. He had 3 picks. Remember, he had 30 picks a couple years ago. Yes. Might have been with the Saints, might have been with Tampa, but there's a reason. He's exciting, and he does a lot of good things, but kind of makes you, you pull out your hair. If he could just not throw those bad interceptions at the most untimely situations, he'd be probably a legitimate starting quarterback.
The unfortunate truth about Jameis Winston is that the floor is about as many floors underground as the ceiling is high for Jameis Winston. And we figured that out on Monday night, as we've seen through much of his career, which you alluded to. But, Mike, I think what really strikes me about Bo Nix is the poise in the pocket. He's equally adept and dominant in terms of having command within the confines of Sean Payton's scheme as he is making plays, scrambling off schedule on the run. Couple big throws last night. You know, I look at Bo Nix, and he was the offensive rookie of the month across the NFL in the month of October. big game for them in a big spot in the game that they needed to keep the playoff train chugging along. 294 yards last night, the passing touchdown. Yes, he threw 2 picks, but he responded well to them. I think what's really standing out and working for Bo Nix right now is he's delivering on the promise of working with Sean Payton that a lot of people thought would happen with Russell Wilson a year ago. But his upside is just so much higher even from here. When you talk about the downfield accuracy, the arm strength, the decision making, his comfort out there with the speed of the NFL game, I'm really optimistic about Bo Nix's upside and the Broncos and what they're building there with Sean Payton and Bo Nix as the duo that they're building around.
They're only going to get better. I mean, they have Marvin Mims is their one of their star receivers and whatnot, and they don't have necessarily a name running back, but you're right. The way Sean Payton and Bo Nix, I like what he said earlier in the year. He said he's got a little. What was the name of the movie where Ferris Bueller? He said he's got a little Ferris Bueller in him. You kind of have to get that out of him. I think that he maybe thinks he knows a little bit more than the old man sometimes and just kind of does his thing. And we saw some video of him kind of going back at the coach a couple of weeks ago, which went over okay. Now you can do that once in a while, but it shows that he's seeing some things out there that maybe the coach isn't seeing, and he wants to let that kind of be known that, listen, this is what I'm seeing on the field. It's not always from your vantage point what you're seeing. So he has the confidence to go at the coach and kind of tell him this is what I think we need to be doing, and in this situation, that situation. But he's coming along, and again, he was 70% out of Oregon. I mean, he's a very highly accurate passer, which is the thing that separates the elite from just the average quarterbacks in the NFL. And I think they found their guy there in Denver. I think it was the 12th pick overall, so he lasted till 12. So I know some teams are probably like, could have had him, didn't have him. Giants may be one of them. They might have waited a year late to pull the trigger there, but and that situation's a mess. But I like what Denver's doing. They're going in the right direction with Sean Payton. You remember last year where they went from bottom when they gave up 70 points to the Dolphins in that one game? I mean, that was a low point for Sean Payton, but he's really turned things around. What a difference a quarterback makes. Listen, I know Russell Wilson's doing a great job with the Steelers, but for some reason, and he didn't have a bad year statistically with the Broncos, but he didn't quite fit in for some other reasons.
It never meshed. It never meshed between Russell
Wilson
and Sean Payton.
But so in 1 year, if you can make that selection, you get the right quarterback for your franchise. Because if you don't have a quarterback in this league, you don't have a franchise. You don't really have anything going. Look at the teams that flounder year in, year out without the franchise guy. I think Bo Nix is the guy in Denver.
I agree. And you brought up the Giants. And I actually had this thought last night watching the game, how much different the trajectory of the Giants would be if they had taken Bo Nix at number 6 rather than Malik Neighbors. You can go and get the receiver anytime. Later in that draft, you could wait until 2025 to get the receiver. But we've hashed and rehashed the Daniel Jones situation on this podcast over the past couple months. But if Bo Nix were in New York, that franchise looks a lot differently. But in the AFC right now, you look at the Broncos, they moved to 8-5 after Monday night's win, 77% chance of making the postseason if the season ended today. So barring some sort of unforeseen calamity, which isn't going to happen with a defense that dominant and a quarterback who's playing as well as he is, developing as each week goes on, they're going to make the postseason in the AFC. But Joe, my question to you is, you look at the landscape of the AFC right now, and it really, in my opinion, feels like, especially after Sunday, especially after what we saw in Baltimore and the Eagles going down and beating the Ravens at their own game at the style of play that they like to play most, it really feels like it's the Buffalo Bills and everybody else in the AFC. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that it's still going to be the gauntlet once the playoffs get underway that we expect it to be going into the year?
I think it's the Bills. I agree with the Bills. I think they are the top echelon team in the AFC. However, you do have a team that does have a better record, although they haven't really shown to be quite dominant this year. Not that they were last year either, but they always seem to be a thorn in everyone's side when it comes to the playoffs. I would still say that Kansas City, believe it or not, is the team to beat until you stick a stake through Patrick Mahomes' heart. He
Yeah.
doesn't die. He's 15-3 in the playoffs. They said he couldn't win a road playoff game. Well, until last year, he didn't play a road playoff game.
Right.
And he went through Baltimore. We went through Buffalo, then Baltimore, won two of the toughest places to play in the league because those teams were very good last year. Won both those games, wins the Super Bowl in overtime, coming from 10 down again. Third time he's won a Super Bowl coming from 10 down again. Their numbers are horrendous. They are
Right.
24th in the league. And I always talked about turnovers. I'm a big proponent of turnovers, turnover margin. They're 24th in the league at a -4, and they're 11-1. Now, again, they're not the 11-1 team like we saw the Eagles at 10-1. Last year, that team looked sick. Something was wrong with them, and you
Yes.
couldn't figure out what, and then they collapsed. The Chiefs just, when they need to get it together and call right plays and guys need to catch the football like they weren't doing most of last year. And, they have Kareem Hunt now, and they brought back
Pacheco.
yeah,
Isaiah Pacheco's
Pacheco.
back and healthy.
He's healthy now. And, Kelsey's still going to be Kelsey. Mahomes is still going to be Mahomes. You see in close games what happens. He'll bust a 33-yard run. It'll be a ridiculous run too, running through guys or almost going out of bounds and then cutting it back. He did that in the Super Bowl against the Eagles. They won the game with that third down and long that he ran for. He does a lot with his leg. It's not just his arm. His numbers are not good this year, but they weren't good last year. They were horrendous. They had led the league in drops. They're still the team that until I see them dead with no pulse and someone pronounces them dead, I still think they're the team that you have to get past. But if you were to ask me this year, if I was going to bet, I certainly would have bet against the Chiefs, but I put my money on Buffalo. I think they're the most complete team this year. Interestingly enough, addition by subtraction, I didn't think when you get rid of Stephon Diggs, one of the elite receivers in the league, I know he's out with a knee injury for the whole year, but when he went to the Texans, I didn't think they'd get better, but it almost, because there was always a dynamic between Allen and Diggs. It seemed like Diggs wasn't happy, not getting the ball enough. It seemed like maybe Allen was trying to force it to him, but to make him happy at times. With that gone, they become Mac Hollins.
Mac Hollins steps up. Yeah, becomes a
steps up. The shoeless one couldn't make it with the Eagles. Was a special teamer here. He's playing ball. James Cook, you always saw Dalvin Cook was the main running back of the two brothers. James Cook has really stepped up and been their, bell cow back. Allen doesn't have to throw the ball as much anymore. You don't see, he only has 5 interceptions this year. Last year, I think opening game against the Jets, he threw 3 or 4. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he doesn't have those games anymore, which was his reputation of, turning into a pick machine, turning into Jameis Winston at times. He hasn't done that this year. He hasn't had to. He's been very complete. The whole team looks pretty buttoned up. I'd say Buffalo, the team to beat, but until they get past Kansas City, we'll talk in January.
I have a really hard time quantifying what the Chiefs are this year, because on one hand, you have the mystique, which you talked about, the Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes aura that I agree with you, that until the clock reads 4 zeros on the scoreboard in a playoff game and the Chiefs have fewer points than their opponent, I can't count them out. I mean, if you leave 7 seconds on the clock and Patrick Mahomes needs to go 45 yards to kick a game-tying or game-winning field goal, they're getting those 45 yards. It's just what the Chiefs are. It's what they do. It's how they win in the postseason. And up until maybe the last 2 weeks, that had been one of the 2 or 3 most dominant defenses in the NFL, really playing above their head and really being the catalyst and driving force to the Chiefs' 11-1 start so far this year. But you brought up the numbers and you brought up the metrics, and you talk about the turnover differential at -4. They're behind teams like the Carolina Panthers and the Jets and the Dolphins, and the point differential isn't that much better at +54. That's only 11th best in the NFL right now. So you're talking about a team from a metric standpoint that's in the fringes of the playoff conversation when you compare them to other playoff teams. But you have Patrick Mahomes, you have Andy Reid. You look at Isaiah Pacheco, looks like he's the piece that elevates and accelerates what that offense is able to do. If you get Hollywood Brown back and healthy, you look at what DeAndre Hopkins has already brought them. The pieces are there, the weapons are there, the firepower is there, the intimidation factor is there. But then I watch them stumble through Black Friday trying to give that game away 17 different ways to the Raiders and almost giving it away like an Amazon package on the front door. And my brain isn't processing that this is still those Chiefs. Are they still those Chiefs in your opinion? Can they beat Buffalo when it matters in the postseason, be it in Arrowhead or in Orchard Park? Because it feels like that's where this thing is heading right now.
If I didn't see what happened last year, I'd probably say no. I didn't think they could last year. You know, they were worse in turnover margin last year. They were 28th at the end of the season in turnover margin, minus 11. There was only 4 teams worse than them. That's impossible. It's unheard of that you win a Super Bowl with those numbers, because turnovers to me are extremely important. Other than the score, they're the most important thing on the stat sheet, I think. So they got it together. They get it together. They find ways. I mean, yes, did the Raiders kind of implode on that last, the snap that went off of O'Connell's shoulder? And they seem to get lucky, but if you're good, sometimes you get those breaks.
You create luck. You create your own luck.
You create your own luck. You know what I mean? And sometimes you're in there, you're in the other team's head. If they're thinking like we're thinking, like we have to do this, something extra to get Mahomes to do this or that, the other thing. You start thinking too much. And, like the Bengals, a late penalty when he's running out of bounds cost him a playoff game. Things like that. An interference call earlier in the year also cost him a game. Things like that. Kansas City finds ways. And when the mallet goes down, look at all the drops they had last year. They led the league in drops. I didn't see one drop in the postseason. And Mahomes, I don't believe, threw an interception since Christmas Day last year when they turned the ball over 4 times against the Raiders. By the way, they lost to the Bills this year. Before that, the last loss they had was on Christmas Day to the Raiders at home. I mean, that's almost a calendar year. There's 22 days left to this Christmas. They've lost 1 game since. They find ways. And when you have Patrick Mahomes back there, he might have a 2-interception game and not be. Again, when it's crunch time, he finds ways. He was flawless in the 4th quarter of the Super Bowl and overtime, going right down the field, down 3 against the Niners, needing a field goal. It didn't matter, right down the field. And the play calling too gets even better. Andy finds
again in overtime this year against Tampa Bay on a Monday night game that the Chiefs had no business winning.
No business winning.
Defense gives up all kinds of yards. Baker Mayfield has one of the strongest performances of this season offensively, and Patrick Mahomes gets the ball in overtime. Hurt his ankle earlier in the game. They were carrying him off all the sidelines, and gets himself back up and leads a game-winning drive
right down the field. Seems like they really focus up, and they make very few mistakes. A lot of times the team that wins big games is not the one that makes big plays or bigger plays. It's the one that makes fewer mistakes, fewer colossal mistakes. And they were pretty flawless in the playoffs last year, which was kind of mind-boggling considering they were a mess most of the year. If you watch even opening night against Detroit, Kadarius Toney dropped like 5 balls. I mean, it was an embarrassment to start the season. And in the middle of the season, they led the league in drops. They didn't have any receivers to speak of. People were talking about, getting rid of Tyreek Hill and how that affected them. Heck, they won 2 Super Bowls without him now. 2 Super Bowls without one of the most explosive players in the league. Everyone thought, oh, you can't get rid of him. Well, guess what? Andy finds ways to do it. He's the quarterback whisperer. He is. Listen, you know me, I hammered him when he was here in Philadelphia for 14 years because he couldn't get over the hump and he would do dumb things and whatnot. He had a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. Couldn't get them to that level. Got them to the Super Bowl, but faced the GOAT. And probably could have done a little better, had a chance to win that game, but didn't. He goes, and I'll give him credit for this, because he went up 17 spots, and it was his call with his general manager to go up 17 spots and take Patrick Mahomes, where a lot of people had never even really heard a whole lot about Patrick Mahomes playing at Texas Tech. His record wasn't great under Cliff Kingsbury there, but Andy saw something.
Into a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Into a first ballot Hall of Famer is a lock. I mean,
3-time Super Bowl MVP, 3-time Super Bowl champion.
4 Super Bowls Andy's been to in Kansas City. He's won 3 of them.
Yeah. Can't argue with the resume.
You can't argue with that. It's amazing. And people go, well, you're going to retire? Retire? And he's like, I'm sticking around as long as he does. I'm trying to catch Belichick. You know what I mean? Like, who would have thought that? Andy was trying to win 1 and to get rid of that monkey on the back that he had in Philadelphia. Now he's like the favorite every year. And I got to be honest, his play calling has been flawless in the playoffs. And his execution, because he has Mahomes and guys were catching the ball last year, and just the plays they called on that last drive to tie the game and then go into overtime was just the 4th and 1. If you remember the Super Bowl, they had a 4th and 1, and Mahomes rolled out and got the first
Yep.
down. No one, they're always a step ahead, and
Running the same play in back-to-back Super Bowls, the corn dog play down near the goal line. They ran with Kadarius Toney in the Super Bowl against the Eagles,
did
and
it
then they
twice to the
called it
Eagles
again.
down in the fourth quarter, twice.
Yep, and they called it again in the
Was it
Super Bowl against the
McCall Hardman?
49ers
McCall
this
Hardman
past
might have
year.
got it. They brought him back. He went to the Jets for a few games. They bring
Yep.
him back. Same play.
Yep.
Like, does anyone have film on these guys? You know what he's going to run, and it's the corn dog play and it's a brilliant play because
Yeah.
you get the defensive back moving one way, and then boom, and it's a quick little easiest touchdown Mahomes has ever thrown.
For sure. But yet you look at the way this season is shaping up, and I wrote about it in the column on Monday morning, that the Eagles Ravens game was so unique because you had not one, not two, but three potential MVP candidates on the field in the same game, with two teams that in a vacuum, if you look at the Eagles and the season they're having and the Ravens and the season that they've had to that point, and the rosters for both of these franchises right now, that if you told me that we fast forwarded to February and that was the Super Bowl, I think people would agree, okay, I can understand how that played out. And yet, in the MVP conversation after Sunday, after the Eagles defense held Derrick Henry under wraps, after outside of the final drive of the game, really had Lamar Jackson contained for about 3/4 of that game. He had a nice first quarter, led him to a 9-0 lead in the opening frame, but then the offense never really got going. It really feels like the MVP race, similar to what we're talking about in the AFC, is now down to two players, Josh Allen and Saquon Barkley. Now, to the best of my knowledge, neither one of us have an official MVP vote. But if I went to you right now, Joe, who gets the vote as your MVP for this season?
And I'm saying this with complete objectivity because that's what I do when I come on these things, and I would do it anyway. But I think Saquon Barkley is the MVP right now, and I'll tell you for two reasons. One, he leads the league in rushing, 1 yard short of 1,500. He's on pace to break Eric Dickerson's record. I get it, albeit in 17 games if he stays healthy. But I'm not worried about projections. We're talking right now. He's completely changed the trajectory of the Philadelphia Eagles and completely changed their philosophy. They were a throw it first team, and they still might try to set up the run with the pass. And you can see that it's the blueprint every game. They come out in the first quarter and they look dreadful. Dreadful. Next thing you know, it's almost like they're gathering information. Oh, okay. So Kellen Moore now sees this, and this, and boom, on second quarter, 2 touchdowns. Barkley was getting stronger as the game goes along. His guards, Becton and Dickerson, have been phenomenal. They were phenomenal against the Ravens. Even though he didn't bust one until late, he was picking up 8, 9, 10 yards at a clip on a couple of those first half gashes, and you can see they get stronger in the second half, and then they feed him more, and he wears down teams. 270-yard runs against the Rams in the second half, unheard of, untouched. By the way, 15 plays this year, Saquon Barkley untouched by a defender, and 7 of them have gone for touchdowns. Untouched. He gets through that hole. Goodbye. He was clocked at 22 miles an hour. It was the game against, might have been the Saints game, where he turned that game around, where he scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter. 22 miles an hour. Like Gordie Howard didn't even skate that fast at his, when he was clocked back in the day. Ridiculous. And they just keep wearing you down and wearing you down. They do have a very good offensive line. It's got much healthier. Here's my question to you, because I went into the numbers with Josh Allen, because without actually looking, I'm like, yeah, Josh Allen's done a phenomenal job. Really cut down on the interceptions. He's second to Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar has only 3. Allen has 5. And that was his biggest flaw, before this year. But in passing, he's 14th in the league. No, I get it. They've cut down a lot of these elite quarterbacks where teams have a good running game, like Jalen. They've cut down his since that debacle against Tampa Bay. Remember, he went from 33 passes a game to 21. I think you wrote about that in one of your Substacks. And they started running the ball more.
I think that when you look at the passing numbers with teams like the Eagles and teams like the Bills, they don't find themselves playing from behind all that often.
That's
And
just
that's
true too.
where you look at Josh Allen and what he's done with the Bills. Look, he's in the conversation,
Oh,
and I probably
absolutely.
plead until I'm blue in the face that the MVP is Saquon Barkley, and we'll get into some of the things that I've heard from people around the league that I wrote about in Monday morning's column. But I understand the Josh Allen argument because the Bills are the Bills because of Josh Allen.
Absolutely.
I look at that defense and they have some nice players, but it's not like I'm looking at a Steelers defense where you have Minkah Fitzpatrick and Joey Porter Jr. and TJ Watt and Cam Hayward and all of these guys. It's not like it's the Eagles defense that's the number one ranked defense in the league. It's not like it's even what they had in Baltimore or what Kansas City has with Chris Jones and all of those playmakers at all three levels. The Bills are the Bills because of Josh Allen. And you touched on it a little bit earlier. The addition by subtraction, when you go from throwing to Stephon Diggs to throwing to a first round rookie who underachieved through the vast majority of so far this season in Keon Coleman, Amari Cooper, who really has taken some time to get his sea legs underneath him in Buffalo since the trade deadline, Mac Hollins turning him into a playmaker, Curtis Samuel was in that wide receiving core. Allen, the Bills are the Bills because of Allen and the 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. It's also the rushing yards. He's as prolific on the ground as he is as a quarterback and a facilitator in the passing game. He's rushed for 335 yards and 6 more touchdowns. The Sunday night in the snow, in the blizzard, he caught and ran a touchdown on the same play. It's the absurdity of the Josh Allen experience is what it is, but if I were a voter, Saquon Barkley gets my vote because he, as an NFL executive, told me on Sunday night for Monday morning's column that he changed that entire offense and that entire team. That's what he did for the Eagles this year and what he's doing right now. We can talk all we want about the fact that he gets better as the game goes along. The 270-yard touchdown runs against the Rams, the 25-yard touchdown run bouncing off 2 defenders to put that game on ice in Baltimore. I wrote on Monday, Mike, that Joe, that game was hinging on and going to depend on which team's playmaker made the big play.
We talked about that before it happened. Who's going to make a play?
And Saquon made the play, made the run, won the game. You talk about the win against the New Orleans Saints. The Eagles don't win that game without Saquon Barkley. You talk about the win in Brazil in the opener. They don't win that game without Saquon Barkley. I'm not so sure that they beat the Commanders without the points off the turnovers and the rushing touchdowns that he had in that game. So you have 3 games right there, and then Sunday afternoon in Baltimore putting it on ice. I'll even say the Rams game. He put the Rams game out of reach.
Completely put it out of reach.
He's the sledgehammer. And as an NFC personnel executive told me Sunday, quote, Sean Alexander won the MVP with the Seahawks as a running back, but he can't even carry Saquon's keys. I think it's a 2-man race between Saquon and Josh Allen, unquote. Great quote, by the way. Great insight
Great quote
from the executive. I don't know how anybody else gets votes other than Josh Allen and Saquon Barkley. And Mike and I talked about this on the podcast last week. Saquon's path to winning the MVP. It had to be surpassing 2,000 rushing yards. It had to be continuing to stack wins. It had to be a big-time performance against the Ravens because it would neutralize a lot of Derrick Henry's buzz and Lamar Jackson's buzz. Well, Saquon checked that box on Sunday.
Played against 2 other guys in the conversation, and he stole the show. Let me just say this: if you want to project out a little bit, what bodes well for Saquon Barkley, they have 5 games left to the Eagles: Panthers, Steelers, Commanders, Cowboys, Giants. In this order, these teams rank against the run in the National Football League. Panthers 32nd.
That could be a 200-yard rushing game. I'm
That
calling
could
that
be a
out right here.
200-yard rushing game.
Yeah.
Steelers are fourth. Okay, that could be a game where he might not get his or might not, eat, as they say, as much as normal. Commanders 27th, Cowboys 31st, Giants 29th. It's stacking up for Barkley if he stays healthy. That his path is there for him. His path. I'm not huge on individual awards. Like, I would rather see a Lombardi, obviously, but I'm so happy for the kid because he's such a good dude and he brings such a culture to the team. Remember that drop pass against Atlanta? They could have the Chiefs record if he doesn't drop that pass. He came back from that. I know he was hurting over that because probably ends that game.
That's who he is. Yeah.
And yeah, and he got his coach a lot of heat for that. Since then, no one's even thinking about that game. He just put the team on his back the rest of the way.
And I do wonder what his career looks like in the trajectory towards a potential gold jacket one day. If he had been in Philadelphia behind this offensive line, or not even in Philadelphia, but somewhere with an offensive line similar to what the Eagles tried out there every week versus what he had to deal with the New York Giants. There was a stat after the Commanders, with Eagles went over the Commanders, Mike. It was looking it over before doing TV post game, that Saquon Barkley's total yards per carry average again when he was with the Giants matched up with his yards per carry average before contact with the Eagles. So he was averaging as many yards before contact in Philadelphia as he was total yards per carry in New York.
Nice to have an offensive line open some holes, right? Just nice. And that's the thing. And listen, I know the Giants get hammered every time the Eagles play, and he does something. They go back to that conversation between, Mara and Schoen about how he's not going to sleep if he walks and goes to the Eagles. They put themselves in a position when they gave Daniel Jones 160 million and then didn't, give Saquon his, and really Saquon was the franchise guy and he didn't have the quarterback. You have a good quarterback as well, you're going to take a lot of pressure off the running game because you can't just focus on, you can stack the box and whatnot. Look, his rookie year, he had 91 catches and 1,300 yards on an average Giants team. Imagine, like you said, I think it's a great point. If he played those 6 years with a legitimate offensive line, whew, but I still think he's got plenty of time left. The numbers, the analytics show, and this is another reason why I think the Giants didn't offer him what he wanted. When you hit 27, running backs start to decline. Well, he hit 27 last June, and this is the best year he's ever had. Not even close. Like he looks so fresh. He looks like, and he hasn't gotten hurt. I know, knock on him, he's banged up a little bit or was banged up with the Giants, missed some time, but he's been fresh and they haven't overused him either here in Philadelphia. A lot of times, again, he gets stronger and they give him more responsibility as the game goes along. And that's not just in times where they need to run out the clock with 7 minutes left and just chunk. Against the Ravens, they ran the last 14 plays were all runs, and it was either Barkley or Gainwell. But they do that in the second half. He's averaging in the fourth quarter 7.9 yards per carry in the fourth quarter of games.
He's wild.
That's my closer.
He should be wearing down. He's getting stronger.
He's getting stronger, and I think you said it. You said in your article, Saquon Barkley is the ultimate closer. He is the ultimate closer. Well said.
No, I agree, and thank you. Thursday night, we have arguably the game of the year across the NFL, or at least one of the games of the year to date. The big game of games is going to be Lions-Bills in a couple weeks in Detroit. But this is a pretty big one too, with the Packers going into Ford Field. And I know, Joe, that Jordan Love guided the Packers to the postseason in his first year as a starter last year. I know he went in and blew the doors off Jerry World and knocked the Cowboys off in the wild card game and came a turnover late against the 49ers away from going to the NFC Championship game. But is this the biggest game so far of Jordan Love's career? Because you look at the Lions, and I think the Lions are the best team in football. I think they're the most competitive, the most physically dominant that you're going to find. I love the hyper-competitive culture. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery might be the best backfield duo in the NFL. They're a machine firing on all cylinders in a class of their own, it seems like. but they're battling so many injuries on defense. And here come the Packers, and here come Jordan Love riding a 3-game winning streak into Motown. Jaden Reed suddenly leading the Packers in receiving, 6 receiving touchdowns. Jordan Love building confidence every single week. Xavier McKinney continuing to look like he's going to get votes for Defensive Player of the Year. First, your thoughts on this game, and am I making too much of it by labeling it the biggest game of Jordan Love's career? Because if they win, they're within striking distance of an NFC North crown and a bye week. You're building momentum. You're gaining legitimacy. What say you?
Well, I probably, it's an interesting question because I always think a playoff game is bigger than a regular season game. But he was a rookie last year, just in his, well, it was his first year starting. So you could almost say, well, every game's pretty huge for a rookie going along, and it's a playoff game in Dallas. Didn't know how he'd show up. And you're right, they blew the doors off. But taking it now forward, his second year, he's an established guy. There was a lot of expectations on him this year, a lot more than last year. And he exceeded those expectations, especially later on in the year. He really came on strong after the first. He struggled in the first 5 or 6 games last year, but then again going into Dallas and winning and almost beating. Was it San Fran? It was San Fran. They had a big lead. I think it was on San Fran, or maybe it was in Detroit last year in the playoffs. Didn't quite get it done, but yeah, I'd say this year absolutely, because you're right. They're 2 games behind the Lions. This is kind of going to be a good test and a barometer. And the knock on Jordan Love this year has been he's been a little reckless with his throws. He needs to maybe wheel that in a little bit. Kirk Cousins leads the league in interceptions with 12. Jordan Love has 11, and some of them have cost him some games. Yeah, I know it was game 1. You're still getting the kinks and rust out. He threw a bad pick in the fourth quarter to Reed Blankenship. Help seal the deal for the Eagles. He's done a couple of those things. He had a 3-interception game a couple of weeks ago. He needs to show up, and he needs to outplay Jared Goff, because you're right. And this is a good opportunity for them, because if you watch Thanksgiving Day, it looked like a mass unit. They lost like 5 guys defensively to Detroit. And I'm not even including Adrian Hutchinson, who went down most likely for the year with that knee injury earlier in the year. And they didn't miss a beat without him, but okay, those things add up. You could say the injuries, they're not excuses. Well, the reasons, though, the reasons that, look at San Francisco this year, they're 5-7. They've had all kinds of injuries. At some point, you're not the same team when you lose your starters. So, but I think it's a very important game for him. Biggest one, maybe since the Dallas game. Maybe it is the biggest one of his career, because now there are much higher expectations on him, because he's considered a top 10 quarterback in the league, and he's considered to be kind of in the realm, maybe not quite there with Jared Goff and some of the other quarterbacks. Look, Minnesota, same division. They have 2 losses. They really need this win. They go down 3 games to the Lions, and Minnesota wins this coming week. They're 2 games behind them. That could be a problem. You still want to put yourself in a good seeding for the playoffs, and you don't want to be 6 where you're playing on the road. But yeah, I'd say it's a very important game for Jordan Love to see, can he tone that down a little bit, and can he hang with who I think is the best team in the conference right now, the Detroit Lions.
No, I agree on the Lions. And this is really about seeding for them, because the Packers have a 97% chance to make the postseason if the year ended today. The North is sending 3 teams to the playoffs, which it's the most competitive division in football. It might be the most fun division in football to watch. And I think that this is a barometer and a litmus test game, not just for Jordan Love, who I spoke to an NFC executive on Friday, just said, hey, look, this is a kid that a lot of people are interested in. This is a kid who's playing at a really high level this early in his career. Who do you compare him to? And he said, he models his game after Aaron Rodgers. That's who he patterns himself after. And if he can cut down on the interceptions, the Packers are going to go far, unquote. And that's, to me, that's the next test for him. Can he do what Josh Allen has done and cut back on the turnovers? Because the Packers have done a really great job of building around him. Josh Jacobs has been, in a lot of ways, Saquon Barkley light to the Packers because he's the hammer late in games for the Packers. So you look at Jaden Reed, you look at Christian Watson, you look at Tucker Kraft, the tight end. These are all young weapons under the age of 24 who are going to continue to develop and grow alongside Jordan Love. But bigger picture, Joe, this game on Thursday night, two of the top 5 teams in point differential. And when it comes to Green Bay's chances of going in there and pulling off an upset, I really think it comes down to whether Jair Alexander can play and play at a high level coming off the injury, missing the last 2 weeks, especially when you're going up against a wide receiving core that has Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is in a class of his own, and Jameson Williams, who is a burner of all deep threat burners across the NFL. This Lions offense is in a different stratosphere in a lot of ways. But if the defense for Detroit is banged up and Alexander is healthy for Green Bay's defense, maybe you get a couple of timely turnovers and Jordan Love put some unexpected points on the board.
You saw what Caleb Williams did in the second half against Detroit. Other than the brain freeze with 33 seconds left, 32 seconds left, threw 3 touchdown passes and was going right down the field again to at least kick a field goal. So they looked vulnerable last week, did Detroit. And their offense, listen, you're not going to be the machine every game. They're only 2 for 5 in the red zone as well. I think that they could be ripe for the Pickens. I don't think they're going to run the table and only have 1 loss at the end of the year. I think this is a game where they are ripe for the Pickens, especially with all the injuries. And it is the marquee game of the week. Really looking forward to seeing what Green Bay can do, not only, just for entertainment purposes and for that division, like you said, Minnesota, and they're going to send 3 teams to the playoffs, which is unheard of. But for other teams trying to get, like the Eagles, trying to get the number 1 seed, I mean, 2 losses, that's great. But guess what? You still have a team in front of you they do have the Bills, like you mentioned, coming up, which is going to be, that's like the game of the year. I've circled that as the game. I can't wait to see how the Bills and Lions, play out in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I mean, the Lions need to keep that. They want to keep that indoor home game 1 seed to even get.
You kind of crack the door open for teams like Philadelphia if you don't take care of business. Heck, teams like the Packers. If the Packers get on a roll, having 3 losses, and if you trip up against Buffalo, now all of a sudden that 1 seed comes into play, and
Sure.
It's a factor in a lot of cities across the league. And Packers are going to the playoffs. Lions are going to the playoffs. But as we get down to this time of year, there always seems to be a couple of teams that if you're going in, you do not want to see on that other sideline. So who to you is that team across the league, Joe, that you want no part of, that you want no business being your opponent in a postseason game?
Well, I'll say it again. And since I already talked about it, I'll get the Chiefs out of the way. I don't want to see them. I'm sorry. They've got number of, if Carson Wentz was the starter for that team, I'd be fine with it. He's not. Patrick Mahomes, as long as he's the starter, not them. Aside from them, I'd probably say I think the Bills are extremely dangerous, but the Steelers are a team that has really come on. And, they're a team, and I said it before the game to you the other day, they muddy up the game a lot of times.
Yeah.
But they can also, they turned it into a track meet against probably the offensive player of the year in Joe Burrow. And Russell Wilson kind of outdid him, had 3 touchdowns. I know there was a pick 6 in there that George Pickens was upset with himself or thought there was a penalty on. But other than that, I mean, Russell Wilson threw for over 400 yards, and they put up 44 points in Cincinnati. That's a big divisional game. Cincinnati's playing for the playoff lives, and guess what? You want to track me? All right, we're going to do that. We have Williams. We have Pickens now, who's one of the elite receivers in the league. Freiermuth, your boy from Penn State, is having a great year. And that defense, like you mentioned, with Porter and Ward and TJ Watt, I mean, that team's got it going on. And Mike Tomlin could still coach. He could still coach. I thought it was a great decision. At 4-2, I don't think he made the switch because he didn't like what Justin Fields was doing. He wanted to see what he had, and I thought it was a great move. It was smart. A lot of people killed him over it. No, you want to see what you have. That's why you went out and you signed Russell Wilson, and he's showing why he went to 2 Super Bowls and he can still play. Wasn't a great fit for him in Denver, but that's a team that can play defense, but they do have some weapons, and they can be very dangerous too offensively when you have Russell Wilson back there. So that's a team that I'd probably I think it's going to be interesting because in 2 weeks they're in Philadelphia. I know it's regular season versus postseason. Postseason's a little different animal, but it's going to be interesting how they match up against the Steelers because the Steelers can muddy up a game, but they can also score some points.
Yeah, they're my pick here as well. They're the team that I want no part of if I were in the AFC. You look at Mike Tomlin has never won Coach of the Year, and a lot of that is because the dude just makes the postseason every single year. And now they've had a lot of playoff exits early. I think that this particular Steelers team is built to buck that reputation. I wrote it on Monday. You talk about the defense. Sixth in total defense, seventh in scoring defense, holding opponents just 18.7 points per game. But the reason Mike Tomlin wins Coach of the Year is exactly what you talked about. They could have muddied along at 4-2 with Justin Fields being a threat to run, but not going to throw for more than 250 yards per game. And you're going to win on the back of TJ Watt having 3 sacks and forcing 2 turnovers and Joey Porter Jr. intercepting a pass and all those things. Russell Wilson seems like the perfect fit for Arthur Smith's scheme. He seems comfortable. And the Steelers have always won with the dominant running game, with a dominant defense that pressures the quarterback relentlessly for 65 minutes of a 60-minute game, that they force turnovers, all those things. But now you have an element of explosiveness, which in a tight game in the postseason, when it's 27-23 with a minute left, well, you can send George Pickens on a 9 route and you can pick up 45 yards on a Russell Wilson bomb. That just seems to be what they can do right now, that Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith have elevated what Mike Tomlin and the Steelers have always been. And look, are they going to go into Buffalo? They're not going to be intimidated by the elements. Are they going to beat the Bills? I don't know if they're going to beat the Bills. Could they pick off Kansas City on a rough day? I think that they could if Patrick Mahomes doesn't rise to the occasion as he has in the postseason every single year. They punched Baltimore in the mouth. They beat Baltimore.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did.
And they beat Baltimore at their game. Could they? They're probably going to get Baltimore in Pittsburgh if they have to play them. I like the Steelers in that game. I don't think that Bo Nix, as much as you and I are both high on Bo Nix, I don't know that I love Bo Nix, even with that defense going into Pittsburgh against the Steelers in a playoff situation.
Not a rookie, no.
There's a handful of teams where if you line them up in the playoffs, I'm taking Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And like you said, they can play it both ways. They can muddy up a game. I mean, I know they lost the Cleveland game, which was, it turned into
things happen in division games, man. Like that's why this Lions and Packers game is going to be so much fun, and why I think the Packers have a puncher's chance. You talk about that game. You talk about the Cowboys and Giants game, or Cowboys and Commanders game a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That there were 57 points scored in the last 40 seconds of the game. Right? Like weird things happen. And I wrote it that going in and playing in a blizzard against the Browns on a short week, that doesn't change to me what they are. And they answered back in a big way against the Bengals.
Doesn't change who they are. Listen, the NFL to me is a different season every week, and you don't know what's going to happen, and crazy things happen. Look, the Chiefs almost lost to the Panthers. Panthers are balling out now. I mean, the Panthers, Bryce Young looked like he might be a complete bust and done when they benched him earlier in the year, fired the coach. He's back. I know they lost in overtime to the Tampa Bay, but he's playing ball now. Weird things happen on a week-to-week basis. Minnesota's 10-2. They lost 2 games in 5 days, and they haven't lost outside of those games. You know what I mean? Yeah. Things happen on a week-to-week basis. Crazy stuff. Look, the Raiders were 13.5-point dogs in Kansas City and should have won that game. You never know what's going to happen on a week-to-week basis in the National Football League. So it's fun. You're going to lose your games. You are, especially in the division, especially in that division. Yeah. I know the Browns have Jameis Winston now. To me, has changed that team around, changed the look of that team. Deshaun Watson was so bad. And Jameis Winston, despite being Jameis Winston, that we talked about his floor, certainly can add some fire to an offense and move the ball downfield. And they do have Jerry Jeudy, and I know they got rid of Amari Cooper, but they still have some weapons, and they still have Nick Chubb and any given Sunday. So it wasn't the worst thing in the world to lose that game. I know they were disappointed because they lost it late, but it's going to happen. That's a team, though, that can kind of beat you both ways now that we've seen it. I mean, I know Cincinnati's defense hasn't been very good this year, but to go up against Joe Burrow and throw a pick six and still win that game with 44 points on the road.
Most points since 2018. You hop on the bus, and that's a character building type of win that brings the team even closer together.
He's got that team believing. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't believe in the Steelers till probably this Sunday. After I saw that, I'm like, huh. And it took Russell Wilson. Listen, it's fine. It takes you some time to acclimate. You're in a new system and you're learning new verbiage. You took over in week 7. What was this last week? Week 13. He's only had 6 weeks and he's lost 1 game.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take that. I'll take that. And it's not like he's a guy who, until you've done something, you haven't done it. He's won a Super Bowl. You can't say, well, it's like, how we talk about like James Franklin or Ryan Day. Can they win a championship? We would think they could, but unless you've actually done it, you don't know that they can. He's won a Super Bowl. Probably should have won 2. He's been in those situations. Say what you want, like him, don't like him. Maybe he does some weird things in situations. Maybe he's learned from what happened to him in Denver. It's kind of embarrassing. But he's with a team now, and he's with Mike Tomlin, who I think is just a phenomenal head coach. Just a phenomenal head. He's won a Super Bowl too. He's been to 2. His record in terms of 10 double-digit wins is like, and being above 500. I saw a stat today. It goes back like 2 decades that they've been a plus 500 team for like as far as you could remember. Which again, it's not winning Super Bowls every year, but it shows just a level of. Look at their stability. They've had 3 coaches since Chuck Noll.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Who does that? Right?
Who does that? You look at Carolina, they've had like 4 in the last 2 years.
Look at the Giants. The Giants. Don Mara models the Giants after the Steelers franchise in his mind, not in practice, but they've had, 5 head coaches in the last 6 years, it feels like.
Right.
Dating back to Tom Coughlin, you've had Coughlin, Ben McAdoo, Pat Shurmur, Joe Judge, Brian Dable. And Brian Dable probably on his way out at the end of this year. So kind of the anti-Steelers, anti-consistency. So the franchises are mirror images of each other in not a great way, kind of the polar opposites. Mike, Joe, looking ahead to this week, what's your circular game? What's your circular game on the calendar this weekend?
Aside from the Thursday night game, I'm looking at. I love when these 2 teams play because they always give them a problem. The Chargers and the Chiefs.
Oh, great kick. Great.
Thank you. I'm just, I'm fascinated with what the Chargers do. They went into Atlanta and picked off Kirk Cousins 3 times and got it done. And they're a team that, again, I think it's fascinating how wherever Jim Harbaugh goes, he turns the culture around right away. And he was a former quarterback, Captain Comeback. He was great at Michigan, Indianapolis. As a quarterback, you would think that he has like an innate, just kind of the philosophy of let's throw the ball because I'm a quarterback, and that's what he likes to run the ball. He likes to ground and pound, and bulk up and be a very physical team. He won at Michigan and won a title. Took him a few years, but turned San Francisco around. Almost won a Super Bowl. Made the decision to go to Kaepernick in Week 9 versus Alex Smith. It was a good decision. They came within yards of winning a Super Bowl that year. Goes back to Michigan and wins a title there. They're on their way. He's got a very good quarterback. That's why I kind of thought that he would probably go to a place that had a good quarterback. But he's also gotten Herbert to understand that we're going to tone down your attempts per game. We're going to try to run the ball. I know Dobbins is out. I think he's on IR right now. But I think that's going to be an interesting game because the Chargers are a team that kind of on the cusp, might be a couple years away. But I think they could give the Chiefs some problems.
That's a really good one. And when you talk about threats to the Chiefs, you have to put what the Chargers are building in that conversation. Ladd McConkey is just an insane receiver already as a rookie. You're seeing the best of Justin Herbert. You saw it the other week on Monday Night Football against the Ravens, where they just want to get downhill on you with the running game. They want to set up Justin Herbert in the passing game. I'm with you. I love what they're building. I think they're a team on the come up, and they're a team that within a year or two, we might be talking about them as the biggest threat, real threat, postseason threat to the Kansas City Chiefs. Could be the dawning of a new phase of that rivalry. I'm going to go in a different direction with my circle of game. Obviously, I think that Green Bay versus Detroit is the big one that you circle, and that would be mine. But I think that the other circle of game that I'm going to roll with for the sake of this segment is the Vikings against the Falcons.
I'm glad you picked that game.
Kirk Cousins' revenge situation coming off 4 picks against the Chargers. Yikes, 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 yikes in that performance. The Falcons, with their history of falconing big games away, is only matched by the Vikings, with Kirk Cousins when he was there. Can Sam Darnold continue this role that they're on? You think about the last 2 wins for them. Overtime, game-winning drive for Sam Darnold in Chicago, game-winning field goal. Last week, game-winning drive to avoid overtime, touchdown pass to Aaron Jones to put it on ice. Suddenly, Sam Darnold is one of the clutch quarterbacks in the league. Aaron Jones, when he's not fumbling the football, has been a dynamic running back. There aren't any more mad scientists, bigger mad scientists in the league than defensive coordinator Brian Flores, who is just wielding guys like Jonathan Grenard like a hand grenade at opposing quarterbacks. This is a team, you talk about the Steelers being a team I wouldn't want to face. I'm not all that comfortable with the Vikings in the NFC being an opponent opposite of a team like the Lions or like the Eagles at the top of the bracket, because they have all the elements too. If Sam Darnold doesn't morph back into the pumpkin rather than the Cinderella carriage, they're going to be dangerous. And in this game, can the Falcons take care of business? Can Kirk Cousins get his revenge? Or are the Falcons going to be the Falcons and the Vikings going to be what we've come to know them to be this year?
Sam Darnold, I have to say, is making me look bad. I've been killing him for 3 years. I've been killing him since
That's only 3. I seem to remember back in our day on the radio.
Okay, fine. Go back to when he was a rookie. Never a big Sam Darnold fan. Okay, I thought he's a walking turnover. Next thing you know, I mean, for a while there, he was in the MVP running, and some of his numbers are actually better than Josh Allen. And he has his team with just 2 losses in that 5-day period on short rest and whatnot. I'm not convinced yet about Minnesota as being as dangerous as a Detroit or a Green Bay even. I know they went in and they had a big lead. They had a 28-0 lead in Green Bay, and Green Bay came clawing back, and they ended up losing the game by 2. But they're good. All they do is win. Listen, they won by 3 over, was it 2 weeks ago? They beat Carolina. They came back to win against the Cardinals the other day in the last minute or two. They find ways. Darnold, remember, even before he took the ball, went down the field, I said, I'm going to say no. You said yes. You're going to say he's going to go down the field. I said, no way. He's not going to do it again. Boom, right down the field, and he scored. And then Kyler Murray threw a pick. If you talk about Atlanta, and I love the dynamics and the storyline of this game, because Kirk Cousins was formerly with the Vikings, got a lot of money, put up good numbers, but there was always he almost has a Jameis Winston kind of ceiling or floor to him, that when he goes into these funks, it's like, did you see
waiting in the big game for the other shoe to drop? Like they'll jump out to big leads, or they'll rush out to an 8-1 record, and you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it tended to drop with Kirk Cousins in Minnesota. And the Falcons as a franchise, their logo might as well be 28-3.
Right. That's very good. You're right about that. Kirk Cousins against the Eagles right down the field after the Saquon drop that I talked about. And he did a couple of those things this year. And you kind of thought, well, he's in a different situation. Did they do the right thing? They paid him $180 million. I like him. I've always liked him as a person. He always gave the Eagles
great guy.
Always gave the Eagles problems when he was with the Redskins. But the last 3 games, they've They're 0-3. He's got 0 touchdowns and 6 interceptions, 4 against the Chargers. That last interception in the end zone, where was he going with that? I mean, it was like, Kirk, what do you again? He threw into a double team meeting. It was like 7 Chargers right there. I don't know where he was going with that, but he has those games. And I don't think it's time to go to Michael Penix. But let me ask you this, and certainly not against the Vikings. Do you think about it? Because they're at the top of their division. In Tampa Bay, guess what? I know they had the injury to Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Mike Evans is back. So they've been winning again, but they're 6-6 because they won the other day as well. They're tied with the Falcons, so they're still in a race. I don't think you go to Michael Penix here, but do you ever think about going to Michael Penix if this continues?
Yeah, I think if you lose 2 more games in a row and you're riding a 5-game losing streak with your season on the line, it might be time. That to me is down the stretch. If you've seen what Kirk Cousins can do, that almost comes down to a take the temperature of the room situation, kind of like we saw in Chicago, because you had the reporting come out that Matt Eberflus wasn't fired until the Veterans Committee went to Ryan Poles and the ownership group and said, hey, this guy lost the room. These guys are about to quit. If Raheem Morris senses that the players are about to roll over on Kirk Cousins or that they don't have the confidence in the quarterback, then maybe you do go to Penix if he's tearing it up in practice, if he looks like he's ready. We don't know what he looks like in practice. We don't know how close he is to being ready. But if Kirk Cousins becomes a hindrance in close games, yeah, I think you have to think about it.
I think so too. And I think you're right. I think 2 more games of this, because it's kind of difficult when you're an elite quarterback to not throw a touchdown in 3 games. Like, you almost have to try not to throw a touchdown. And 6, not only 6 in the last 3, but 4 against the Chargers, and
Not great.
2 coming in the fourth quarter. Again, I don't know how Mike Penix is doing down there, and I know they drafted him and got a lot of heat for that because they just signed Cousins. I thought it was a good move. If you want your quarterback of the future, you can still have your quarterback now and groom your quarterback of the future if you don't think Kirk Cousins is going to be that guy. But I agree. They're still in a dogfight for the division. And if Kirk Cousins is going to be the liability that he's been in the last 3 games, then, loyalty means nothing in the National Football League. Kind of like with Justin Tucker. We haven't talked about him much, but he's a liability now for the Ravens. He might be the GOAT, but when you're missing 10 kicks and you're missing an extra point and the game came down to 5 points, I know they scored late. Might have been a difference in that game, but when do you make moves? So you know what I mean? Like, you like to guys, you like to believe your guys can come out of it, but
yeah. If I'm the Ravens now, you have the bye week, you have the stretch run, the margin for error is getting thinner and thinner and thinner in the AFC. Resumes don't win Super Bowls. And look, you can induct Justin Tucker into the Ring of Honor tomorrow, or put him up there, retire his jersey before the next home game.
Absolutely.
Keep him in the locker room as an ambassador. You can't put Justin Tucker on the field. You can't put Justin Tucker in a clutch situation, any situation where you need points. The man's missed 7 kicks. Look, in a tight game in the postseason, those missed opportunities are going to cost you games for a team, for a roster with the talent and the pieces in place that they should be in the Super Bowl conversation and should be able to go toe-to-toe against the Buffalo Bills, against the Kansas City Chiefs, against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Ravens should be right there with all of those teams. And when your margin for error is next to 0, a kicker who's lost his confidence and maybe lost more than that can't be on the field. Joe, what do you have coming up? How can people find out more? And what have you been up to these days?
Hey, man, I got a lot of stuff going on. I'm a fitness nutrition coach and mindset coach, and we talk a lot about that stuff as well. But I also do podcasts. I do an Eagles solo post-game podcast. I do a couple other podcasts. The Philly Pulse, keeping your city in tune, your city sports beat. I also do one with Steve Callis. I enjoyed doing this one today. So, and I work for Nittany Central. You've heard of Nittany Central, yes?
I sure have.
For Nittany Central. Love doing that. Next, man, you know what? The computers have them favored to win the game.
I saw that, and I'm starting to believe. I'm
about that, huh?
To believe, but I'd love to see my guy James Franklin get that Big Ten championship, get to a home playoff game. If you win the Big Ten, it's a bowl game. It's not a home playoff game. Get to the Peach Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl, whatever the round 1 game is. get to the bye week if you win the Big Ten. Now all of a sudden you're looking at a real chance at a national championship. And I know James really well. And the goal of his, and he said this publicly, wants to become the first African-American head coach to win a national championship. If you take care of business Saturday night against Oregon, that's a big step in the right direction.
Huge step. If Texas falters in their conference championship game, they could be the number 1 seed overall, Penn State. If they win, and probably if they lose, at worst, be a 5 and play a 12 seed, which is a nice position they could take to get, if they don't make the byline, to advance to the second round.
It's going to be a lot of fun over the next couple of weeks.
You do a hell of a job in Nittany Central, my friend, and all your Substacks and everything, and appreciate you working with you. Appreciate you having me on today. It was so much fun.
It was a blast from the past as well. We've had a lot of fun over the years, and I truly appreciate you as the co-pilot on 4 Downs over at Between the Hash Marks. You can subscribe to Between the Hash Marks on Substack. Check me out on YouTube at Matt Lombardo975. And you can check out the Between the Hash Marks podcast on Apple Podcast and Spotify as well. Leave us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. They really help grow the show. Boost stuff in the algorithm, help people find us easier. And thanks for listening, everybody. Joe, this was a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again soon.
Tremendous, brother. Appreciate it. God bless.